Hello, welcome to Awaken the Age of Revealing. This is Doug Michael. It is February 23rd at the time of this recording. I'd like to begin, as always, by thanking my new subscribers. I'm thrilled to see that there's been such an interest in this information. And ladies and gentlemen, these presentations are about to take a turn. I've spent many years uncovering the global tyranny that surrounds us. I think it's important that researchers continue to do that, but I'm focusing in a new direction. The title for today's segment is Practical Spirituality, and I'm just going to dive right into this. If you think what I've presented before is weird and wacky, well, just wait. Okay, the idea for a human shift in consciousness has been a topic of discussion with many people for decades, well before the Mayan long count calendar predicted either the end of the world or a shift in human consciousness. The Mayan calendar and its interpreted prophesied shift in consciousness really caught on in the spiritual marketplace and became one of the greatest book-selling hypes of the first decade of the 21st century. The closer the prophecy date of December 21st, 2012 approached, the more the faux spiritual gurus jumped on the bandwagon, hyping the prophesied shift of energy that would envelop the planet on that date of December 21st and magically sweep humanity into the cognitive land of milk and honey. There was no shortage of speculative spiritual nonsense contained in these varied books, nor was there any lack of excitement from the minds of spiritually oriented people seeking some kind of miraculous and magical release from the horrors of the world we live in and the cognitive tyranny that is becoming more evident with every passing day. All of this hype was sold to a public who does not have the remotest idea about what advanced human consciousness is or what it might represent. But I can tell you this, everyone that bought into that prophesied event sure wanted a boatload of it. Either the aliens who had been piping down channeled messages after channeled messages on an almost daily basis were going to send a fleet of ships to sweep all the believers in this prophecy away to the land of fifth-dimensional bliss, or they were waiting for some kind of cosmic paintbrush to sweep across the consciousness of humanity and take us to the spiritual equivalent of Calgon land. Take me away. No effort on my part. And a lot of people fell into this hype, ladies and gentlemen. No matter how the individual perceived this great shift in consciousness was going to take place, there was not a one of them that didn't feel that they individually, or the select members of the human race, particularly those who agreed with them, were not entitled to this spiritual get-out-of-jail-free card. This same escapist mentality, and that is what it is prevalent in virtually every religion on the planet, whether it is preaching about getting your rewards in heaven, or through following your God, being rewarded with a bevy of virgins in the afterlife. Then we have the escapist notion of the rapture, right? Which really takes the cake for the ideal escapist scenario, whereby the elect of the Christian religion will be bodily raised in the air to meet their God in heaven before the vile enemy Satan is let loose to give the non-believers hell on earth until God finally locks him up in hell and throws away the key. In all honesty, the New Age idea of ascension is nothing but the Christian rapture with a modern spiritualist twist on it. It's the same thing with a different dress-up. It's an escapist mentality based on fear and an inherent sense of cognitive entitlement due to the spiritual elitism of the New Age believers. Absolutely no different than the sense of spiritual entitlement and elitism found in every world religion. Through all of these scenarios and beliefs, we find the hapless ego consciousness, hopelessly lost in fear of hell, or being left behind when God comes to claim his own. The biblical prophecy of the end times has been trotted out time and time again over the centuries, and every time the hype of the end of days gets trotted out, after the fear, paranoia, pleading and praying is over, we find nothing but confused and disappointed egos wondering why their man-predicted calculations of fulfilled prophecy just plain didn't pan out as expected. The Millerite movement is one of the most well-documented religious end-of-days hype that has infected Christianity in the last 200 years. Just look up what eventually came to be known as the Great Disappointment, Search it out, look on Wikipedia, search it on Google. It's called The Great Disappointment, and it'll give you a greater understanding of the irrational behaviors humans exhibit when they are lost in the maze of prophetic fervor and their desire to escape from this ugly old world. If the term The Great Disappointment hadn't already been utilized to describe the Millerite movement, it could just have equally been applied to the 2012 Mayan calendar prophecy fiasco, which followed the same zeal for the modern spiritual community as Miller's religious hype eventually led to the Great Disappointment for his followers. Throughout human history, we have a long track record of predicted and failed prophecies, but we have to acknowledge the apparent weakness in our present system of consciousness that keeps our species playing this game over and over again from one generation to the next. We need to ask ourselves, just what is it about our species that keeps us from advancing from such a state of cognitive dependency on the desire for prophetic escapism? And what is lacking in the human equation that keeps so many of our species roped into proclaimed systems of escapist spiritual beliefs of all kinds? The system of consciousness that we need to alter is that of the ego perception itself. As many of my videos have repeatedly pointed out, it is the ego part of our consciousness that allows us to be ruled by fear. The ego in everyone is insecure, untrusting, avaricious, self-serving, greedy, and is only concerned for itself in any given circumstance. It is the ego that leads every tyrant to believe they are better than those they choose to rule or destroy. And it is the ego, living in a conscious and subconscious state of fear, that makes all of these religious and spiritual escapist beliefs a possibility. Now, just making this observation, I think we have identified what is wrong with the human species and what system of consciousness we are trying to break away from to find a new form of conscious awareness. The problem that we're faced with as a species at this time is the fact that this system of the ego ruling our consciousness is what people who are seeking these escapist fantasies are trying to escape from. It is not the world that is fucked up. It is our consciousness operating under control of the ego that is what we need to shift away from in order to find that road to a new consciousness, a higher state of conscious awareness that leads us to become a better, more civilized species operating within a framework of consciousness that we have yet to imagine. You know, it's all well and good to beat your breast and cry that we need a shift in consciousness, and it is not just the New Agers who are sounding the battle cry for a shift in consciousness. We find the same thoughts echoed by sociologists like Kingsley L. Dennis in his book, New Consciousness for a New World. We have people worldwide, including myself, who have produced videos to try to get the public to wake up to the tyranny that surrounds us, if we can only find the courage to face the truth. In the face of all this tyranny and mind control, seeking some kind of shift in consciousness so our species can rise above all of the ego-generated self-destructive habits and beliefs, well, where are we to turn for solutions? Here is the hardest pill to swallow. The solution has been staring us in the face for generations, but we have failed to see the way out. The solution looks at you, back, when you look into the mirror. If you want a shift in consciousness, you're going to need to be responsible for making it happen for yourself. You're going to have to take personal responsibility for your own consciousness and transcend the control of your own ego. There are no aliens, no God, no cosmic whitewashing paintbrush that is going to arbitrarily give it to us as some form of species entitlement, like some kind of fucking brass ring on the tumultuous ego-driven merry-go-round of life. If you want to see a change, you are going to have to be that change for yourself. Anything less than taking the personal responsibility for your own conscious advancement is nothing but wishful thinking, and it is the pinnacle of spiritual laziness to think some other force in the universe is going to take responsibility for you when you won't take fucking responsibility for yourself. For spirit is nothing more than your own higher consciousness. It's time that, as a species, we take responsibility for ourselves, but it has to be done on an individual basis, as I have stressed again and again, time and again. It must start on an individual level. If you want a shift in consciousness, you are in charge of making it happen for yourself. No one else could do it for you. If you are unwilling to take charge of your life in this regard, you are only continuing to allow forces outside yourself to control your consciousness and keep as you nothing more than a slave to their designs. To desire some mystical or magical bunch of aliens or cosmic force to change things for you is the greatest form of responsibility avoidance anyone can display. What is lacking in this equation is the subject matter of this presentation, and that is practicality, particularly practical spirituality. You know, one of the biggest problems in trying to find this so-called shift in consciousness is the issue of problem identification. People look around and they play the blame game, right? It's the Freemasons, it's the Jews, it's the Vatican, it's the banksters, it's the one percenters, the global elite, it's the Muslims. Nowhere in this blame game do we arrive at the real culprit behind everything that ails human consciousness at this point, and that is the ego itself. We can blame everyone and everything all around us, but most of us are completely unwilling to admit that our own ego consciousness is as guilty as the ego consciousnesses of the world's worst tyrants. The ego consciousness is what we need to shift our consciousness away from. We can't ever hope to shift to something different if we don't know what we are trying to shift from. The fact of the matter is that we are all equally guilty in this planetary game of cognitive tyranny. We are either contributing to it by being one of the assholes, or we are contributing to it by our own victim mentality and blaming others for doing it to us. Any type of other wishful thinking in identifying the problem through the blame game is just another part of the ego defending its cognitive turf. And it is the constant state of defense of the ego identity that keeps all of humanity's consciousness involved in an ever-deepening spiral to cognitive destruction. If we as a species do not recognize the ultimate culprit and take steps to alter this mental tyrant in our own heads on a personal basis, there will be no shift in consciousness, and we may fail to exist as a species as the ego program continues to tear this world apart through religious and racial hatred, feelings of national or cultural superiority and paranoia, and fear of other human beings different than ourselves. It is going to take practical spirituality to resolve these issues in the long run, because one thing is certain: we are not doing so hot as a species the way things are now. And if you can't see that that's true, you really, really need to pull the blinders off and take a good hard look at what's occurring all around you. Now, when we finally come to terms and admit that all of the world's problems can be laid at the feet of the ego and how it acts in all of us, then we have problem identification. The solution to any problem is what? First identifying that the problem exists, and then start to find solutions to resolve the problem. Now, all the videos I've produced were designed to not only awaken the viewers, but to start the process of eroding the illusions our egos adopt and believe is reality. Every one of the perceptual illusions manufactured by those whose only desire is to control our consciousness that we can remove as a controlling factor over our own individual consciousness moves us that much closer to the desired shift in consciousness that much of mankind is seeking. For every lie revealed in these presentations, the viewer is empowered with a truth, and it is ultimately the truth that will set your consciousness free. In order to free our consciousness as a species and finally graduate to the next level of human development, we have to see the present system of consciousness for what it is, and we finally have to be willing to admit what it is inside all of us that allows this state of arrested cognitive development to continue, and which might ultimately destroy us as a species. Under the present system of consciousness, we are all our own worst enemies. Now, the human species on this planet has been held under one form or another of cognitive tyranny for as long as we have been in existence. There has never been in our entire history any kind of golden age of mankind, but we are in a very unique position at this point in our process of cognitive evolution that, with the right tools, we can genuinely create a golden age for humanity to finally grow into if that's what we desire. But this change is not going to be some kind of magical gift from some cosmic wizard or god. If you truly want to see a golden age of mankind, you are personally going to have to help build it, and the construction starts with your own consciousness. We are in the opening stage for building this new world of advanced and responsible humans as the tired old tyrannical systems of the ego collapse all around us. The present system of consciousness ruled by the ego is hopelessly broken and totally irreparable. It's beyond repair. It is a closed box with no way to repair what is inside of it. So if we want to see a new world, we're going to have to create it for ourselves. This is called personal responsibility. That means every individual that wants to see this new golden age of humanity has to do their part to make it a reality. Within this new system, personal responsibility is what is going to make a better world. It will be a world with no more cognitive entitlements, no more free rides because of race, sexual orientation, religion, or nationality as an excuse to prey upon the compassion of others or abuse them to get your own petty ego desires fulfilled. This is going to be a world where we once and for all recognize that we are not multiple races simply due to variances in skin color, but that we are all one race, the human race. If this is not the kind of world you care to live in, you are totally free to ride the present world down to its ultimate conclusion, which right now does not paint a very pretty picture for anyone who keeps riding this dying camel we call reality. To create this new world is going to require a major shift in our consciousness away from where it is presently operating under the control of the ego. But for the moment, it is going to have to happen one person at a time, and that is where you are totally responsible for making it happen for you. This is practical spirituality. It does not rely on mysticism, magic, dependency on one god or another, and the aliens are not going to come save us from ourselves. All of those are impractical ideas of shirking personal responsibility to take charge of our world and our species advancement. We are all fully cognizant of the fact that none of our elected political leaders, and equally so, none of our alleged spiritual or religious leaders, are remotely qualified to lead the way into a new and better tomorrow. So it's up to us, those who have the will and stamina to make the changes in themselves, who will create this new paradigm of human consciousness. All of our presumed authority figures are too wrapped up in their own petty ego games to move beyond them, and this includes the Pope, the politicians, the gurus, the yogis, the imams, and every petty bureaucrat on the planet. If we genuinely want change as a species, we are going to have to be that change ourselves, because there is just plain no one in any kind of leadership position worldwide who wants to change the corrupt system they are fighting so hard to keep in place, unless they are seeking to put up some other kind of tyrannical system in its place, right? Remember, the man who crushes a tyrant's head becomes a tyrant in his stead. That's the world of the ego, ladies and gentlemen. This is all the ego consciousness can do, and it's all this limited form of consciousness can understand. First it creates problems, then the ego tries to fix the problems it causes, then when the fixes don't work, it puts on some other kind of ego band-aid fix, which also doesn't work, and this is the record of human history. This is why history keeps repeating itself, because the ego can't find its way out of its limited cognitive box. It is a closed-loop system that will continue to create more problems as it tries to come up with solutions to the problems it caused in the first place. Think of the insanity of that. The only thing that changes in this vicious, self-destructive cycle of consciousness is the characters on the stage, but the script remains ever the same, repeating over and over, with our species never finding a way out of this cognitive ego trap. Now, there is a large and growing number of human beings on this planet that recognize that what is going on around the world is just not so good. The more people that wake up and realize that the present systems of governance, religion, finance, and the overall sense of entitlement in one form or another in a vast number of human beings, the more they are realizing that we have to try to do something different to find a way to live than in the midst of this constant psychological chaos and fear. The primary psychosis of these paradigms is the ego itself at all levels of human societies worldwide. Humans operating under the ego seem to be living with a form of split personality, where the verifiable facts of a situation tell us one thing, but the thinking and defensive processes of the ego go through a type of mental gymnastics of irrationality, working continuously to preserve and defend its own erroneous personal belief in the face of stark evidence to the contrary. The absence of definitive physical scientific proof that most people demand as evidence keeps a large portion of the world accepting what logic and available human knowledge tells us what should be so, just through the powers of observation. By adhering to the need of physical material evidence before some can believe any possibility, what we have is a species that is so brainwashed in material existence that they can imagine nothing beyond the normal five senses, the five-sense reality prison. It's like much of humanity lives in Missouri, right? The show-me state. Absent this hard physical evidence presented according to our limits of perceptual acceptability, those who look at the vast number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy alone and can still arrogantly think we are all alone in the universe are only displaying a form of cognitive denial. Through the mind-controlled processes of religion and modern mass media, humanity has been so dumbed down, their consciousness so limited in its boundaries of perception, that if we allow it to continue, we will be little more than sludge on the boot heels of those whose only desire is to use our species for revenue generation, right, and entertaining their twisted, tyrannical whims. We see the evidence of this all around us through every avenue of cognitive media control, and all but the most astute of the human race move blissfully forward into the human corral of tyranny, grinning stupidly every step of the way to their destruction. We have been so controlled over the ages that we are now fearful to offer any idea or concept that goes beyond the herd norms for fear of being called crazy by a species of people who at this point in their evolution, as a rule, wouldn't know reality and truth if it came up and bit them on the ass. This fear of being ostracized by our society serves as an enforcement tool of the controllers and makes their human herd members watchmen over the other members of the herd to make sure that they don't get out of line from the standard accepted version of reality believed by the herd, right? We police one another. This fear mechanism of being rejected by others is part and parcel of the ego itself. The ego demands acknowledgement and acceptance in the eyes of others, and the ego uses its own fears against our psyches to control our inherent spirit consciousness. The ego is like a mind virus. It could be compared to a parasite on our original consciousness. In order for us to find and reattach to our originating consciousness, to our inner spirit, we have to remove the control of the ego parasite as the governing element over our consciousness. The word spirit is bandied around in numerous contexts and has been for generations, but in virtually all of them, it refers to some kind of supernatural force outside of ourselves, when in actuality, all spirit really is the original consciousness we all possess inside of us that this ego parasite has taken over and poisoned our true consciousness. This ego parasite is like a computer virus, a piece of malware on our psyches that controls us and limits our perceptions and prevents our advancement into a more consciously aware species. Now I'm going to go out on a limb with some of my viewers here and run the risk of being called crazy or a lunatic, more than some may already think I am. All of my videos present a pathway through a process of what one might call an erosion of illusions that we must all go through in one form or another in order to peel back the layers of the world of our perceptions controlled by the ego parasite. Every one of these pieces of information that we can see and come to terms with as nothing more than a perceptual lie moves us that much closer to finding that originating consciousness, our spirit consciousness, lying buried and hidden and just beyond our grasp so long as the ego parasite keeps its limited worldview in place. There are tens of thousands of channeled messages from alleged alien races or ascended masters, saints, and otherwise that are readily available all over the internet and that permeate the spiritual sections of the bookstores. These channeled messages, for those who still believe in the Bible, are no different than the messages piped down by God to many of the biblical prophets and seers. So if you have a hard time with that concept, it has been with humanity for a long, long time. If you take the time to read any cross-section of these channeled messages, they generally promote the escapist mentality of the aliens coming to save us, or about the ascension process, where people will be magically lifted into the fifth dimension. Now, all of these messages about dependency should be ignored because the agenda behind them is exactly the same mind control message of dependency of the world controllers. The New Age in general is just the next step to create a new type of homogenized quasi-religion hiding behind the ideas of the mystical interpretation of the word spirit. I personally don't put any store in such messages of spiritual dependency and generally ignore their messages. These channeled messages on their face claim to originate from some type of off-world consciousness or another. I don't personally endorse channeling as a practice, but through my own process of deconstructing my own limited ego perceptions, I realized that the possibility of some type of telepathic communication or psychic connection to different intelligences in the universe is something that we should not automatically rule out as a possibility, simply because our cultural boundaries and ego mindset refuses to entertain the possibility that it might remotely be real. Now, I know I'm dancing down the road to what some will consider woo-woo land in putting forth this presentation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I am crazy, but that our cognitive constraints of what we consider real should be in question more than my presumed craziness. I am personally against any idea or doctrine that takes people down the road of dependency or entitlement and moves the human race away from the concepts of freedom and personal responsibility. I have posted links to 3 books in the description below that are free to those with inquiring minds who can embrace the possibility that the human race is not alone in the universe, and that there are actually more advanced races in the universe who just might give a shit about whether we destroy this planet or not, or whether we have it within us to advance our consciousness as a species. Now, I don't necessarily agree with every ounce of what is written in these books, but I give them substantially more credence than messages by those who condescendingly call us dear ones at the beginning of their channeled messages of swill, preaching docility and spiritual escapism. With most of the channel material in the marketplace being largely controlled by these consciousnesses who appear to be seeking subservience to their hidden designs, the books presented below carry a different type of message. Nowhere in these books will you find the same condescending attitude present in the vast majority of New Age channeled swill. I am personally convinced that humanity stands at a crossroads for our development as a species into a more consciously aware species, that in order to evolve past all the tyranny that surrounds us, we can no longer take the Johnny get your gun mentality to solve the issues that we face as a species. We've tried that over and over again throughout human history, and in the end, such a mindset built on ego fear or ego superiority never seems to work. We have to find within ourselves the courage and ability to adapt into a new kind of human being, and that type of advancement will come with the advancement of our consciousness, not at the end of a gun. When we can accept the possibility that this is the real path to advancing humanity, when I find passages like this, it makes my ears perk up and listen to the message more closely. So here it is, quote, "To accomplish this, first you must open your eyes and see what is happening all around you. You must then come to the unpleasant understanding that you have allowed this to occur because overwhelming methodology of deception influenced you, and you resisted becoming involved through taking any personal responsibility in changing it. Careful Careful remembering of past intuitive feelings brings you to the truth. You are now and have been aware that something sinister is present. In all honesty, you lack the courage to look at what it might be because of the implications of what it could involve personally. Courage to do this has come through the change of your attitude. The magnitude of the implication of what the planners of this situation are capable of doing to your personal future and that of family and friends has allowed your desire to know to overwhelm your reluctance. This then leads to the necessity of considering its larger implication, the planet and its inhabitants as a whole. This process has brought you to the point of looking directly into the face of truth. Unfortunately, it is not some religious or esoteric concept that is the truth that will set you free, but what it has been your desire to avoid at all cost. What you must understand is that this truth is about a situation that could end your earthly experience in extremely unpleasant circumstances and places your eternal existence in jeopardy. The stakes are extremely high, and the circumstances are dire indeed. We've reached the point that we have to find the courage within ourselves to admit that our own mental attitudes and that of our ancestors, all operating under the limited perceptual constraints of the ego parasite, has led us to this point in humanity's conscious evolution. We have all been told we need to think outside the box. What we need to realize as a species is that the box is in fact the limited perceptions we live by under the control of the ego consciousness. It is this cognitive box that keeps us living in fear and continues to make us feel powerless in the face of the tyranny and control that surrounds us. So long as we continue to believe the lies of the ego parasite, we are nothing more than paralyzed deer caught in the headlights of a reality that we each have the individual choice and responsibility to change. Again, from the Handbook for the New Paradigm, quote, "This is not a time to hide in your usual excuse of, what can one person do? A large number of one persons can accomplish a great deal. Becoming cannon fodder is not the solution. It is required that you become a much subtler influence. Learn one truth now. Subtle energy is powerful, and the most powerful energy is subtle. Your Bible says, in the beginning was the Word, but words are thoughts spoken out loud, an inaccurate translation. In the beginning was thought. That is the subtle energy that we are asking you to employ. Simply change the focus of your thought. Do not allow yourself to dwell upon the horrors of what is planned for you, but turn your thought to what it is that you would prefer to experience." An old spiritual adage tells us, "As you think, so you are." So long as we allow our consciousness to be ruled by external forces and the internal ego parasite, we feel powerless to change anything. This is exactly how the controllers want us to continue to think. They want us cognitively paralyzed in the headlights of their agenda of mind-controlling tyranny. So long as we choose to continue to play their game under their rules, we are nothing but willing victims to their designs. If you want to continue to think that you are powerless, then it is as the adage tells you. You will be powerless. We live within the cognitive constraints controlled by the same mental parasite that controls the tyrants of this planet. We can no longer continue to fight this system from within this system, for it is the system of consciousness itself that is the enemy of the human race on this planet. In order to stop this downward spiral, into possible species annihilation, we have to come up with something new and different and start shaping this different world in the midst of all this turmoil that surrounds us. Again, from the Handbook. The evidence of the necessity to do this surrounds you in irrefutable profusion. You need only to open your eyes, consider the changes in your personal freedoms that are happening in quick succession, and listen to hear the researched evidence in both spoken and written presentations on your radios, internet, and in your books. Very soon those will no longer be available to you, leaving only word of mouth, so it is imperative that you respond to this information. You are encouraged to react only through your change of attitude and in your commitment to become a part of this subtly powerful movement. There will not be an Armageddon as suggested in your version of the Bible. It shall be a replacement of their planned world through shifting the focus of the awareness of the beings on this planet toward that which is desired rather than that which is being forced upon them. It shall be individual inner change that shall conquer the outer forces that plan to control your very essence of self-awareness. Upon the acceptance of this clarion call lies the future of your survival and the experiences that wait for you within eternity. Now, what makes these books and their message superior to the standard New Age channeled swill is that they put the responsibility for change squarely on our shoulders where it rightfully belongs. If we are not willing to elevate ourselves both as individuals and as a species, how arrogant a mindset is it to think we are entitled to be rescued by another advanced race? Yeah, they're tripping all over themselves to come and save us from ourselves, save us from our own ignorance. I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for it to happen, ladies and gentlemen. I'm offering these books for those who have some kind of inner drive to find a way out of the current spiral of tyranny over our consciousness that is enveloping our planet. Whatever changes we make as a species are going to have to offer a different solution to all those humanity has tried in the past, because they have proven to be dismal failures where advancing our consciousness as a species is concerned. When a machine is broken, we can only add spare parts and do baling wire fixes for a limited time before it ultimately falls apart. The present system of human consciousness is that broken machine, and as should be patently obvious, it is in the process of failing altogether. The system of consciousness in which we have operated since our beginning has run the gamut. It has no place to advance. So we are at the crux point where we have to build a new machine as the old one breaks down and will ultimately die, or we will perish at the hands of this self-destructive form of consciousness. What we are observing as the world around us reaches what appears to be a crescendo of panic should be viewed as the last dying breaths of a system that no longer can support a species that, in many respects, has outgrown its cognitive shoes. We can choose to view this world through the lens of feeling powerless to do anything about it, or we can find the courage within ourselves to create something new amidst the chaos. Or as the handbook spells out in different words, quote, "This is a moment in which to be aware of the changing of the guard." It seems that the destiny of the planet has been wrestled from the control of its inhabitants, as it would appear the control of the Republic of the USA has been taken from its people. Movement within the conscious awareness of the inhabitants present has begun. These levels of consciousness are subtle and they are powerful. Notice of this change in consciousness is not at a vibratory level that will alert the negative forces. Its momentum builds within the subtle, powerful planes of energy forces that holds this planet in focus. It is thought interacting within itself. It is acting in concert as a changing perception of the mass consciousness that is similar to a natural shedding process. Like the snake, there is an itchiness that is being felt. This process allows for a time of vulnerability and danger from enemies, for it is an internal process. The snake indeed goes within an available den because during this internal process it becomes literally blind. All focus is within itself as the process goes through its formation of a new outside experience, for it has outgrown its ability to continue on as it is. Even the covering of the eyes is changed so that it sees its world anew. Only the death of the snake can prevent this cyclical occurrence, thus it takes great care during this process. This is an apt analogy for our consideration of the progress of mankind through what appears to be a dilemma of great proportion. Just as the fetus grows too large for the womb and must give up its current experience and adventure out into a completely new environment, there are guiding examples throughout nature to suggest this process is a natural phase of manifested life experience. Using the analogy of the snake from this passage, there are many human beings on this planet that are feeling this itch to be something better, to be something more as a human being. To date, there has been little to no information that can show us the way how to find a solution because we are all as enslaved to the same system of consciousness as those around us. We keep looking inside this cognitive box for solutions, and we have to realize that this box of limited awareness and consciousness is not where we will find the solution to this problem. As a species, we are going to have to do something, create something that has never been done before, and that means we have to get outside this cognitive prison to find our solutions. We are going to have to destroy this box where our individual consciousness is concerned. The books presented highly emphasized personal responsibility and personal conscious advancement. We live in an ego-controlled world that is always worried about what others think of us. This is part of the herd mentality that keeps the herd going the direction it is pointed by our cognitive controllers. It thrives on collectivism. That's why you always hear me say, be an individual, be unique, be you. In order to move beyond this mentality of herd acceptance, we are going to have to take responsibility for our individual conscious advancement. We can no longer play the game of paranoia and worrying what they do. We have to alter our thinking processes to be concerned what we do as individuals and decide, fuck the herd. We have to adopt a different form of consciousness in order to perform this feat. By continuing to contribute our personal energy into the paradigm of tyranny, we are only strengthening the beast that is working to destroy our very consciousness as a species. So long as we continue to rage at this machine, we are contributing our energies into a system that only wants to control us. I realize how odd this is going to sound to some people, but if we are to create a new paradigm for human consciousness and create a more sane planet and species, we have to stop participating in the energetic vortex of the present system of consciousness that is sucking us all dry on every level imaginable. We cannot create a new paradigm for humanity to move into if we continue to focus our energies on the present system and continue to feed it. We have to starve the beast, so to speak. Now, this concept goes far beyond our present consciousness because to some it sounds like we are supposed to throw in the towel, but that is not what is being suggested here. We have to kind of view this like a tug-of-war with opposing sides, all pulling on the rope to bring the other side to their way of thinking. If you look at the present system of consciousness, everywhere you look you see this tug-of-war between the right wing and the left wing, between gays and straights, between religious believers and atheists, and the list goes on and on. But no matter which side of the tug-of-war that we find ourselves on, we always have our opposite, and it is the differences that are played on by the controllers to continue to rule our consciousness. The kind of shift in consciousness needs to amount to refusing to engage in this tug-of-war. In order to alter our consciousness to another more psychologically healthy environment, we have to let go of all the ropes we cling to in this tug-of-war over our minds. We have to free ourselves from being forced to continually play these games of conflict, all so we can be controlled by our own ego's insecurity, which is nothing but putty in the egomaniacal hands of the global controllers. We can no longer play by the rules of this form of cognitive tyranny and honestly be expected to advance our consciousness. Since there is no place to turn in this circus of conscious tyranny except conflict and hatred, then we are left with only one alternative. We have to create our own reality. We have to create our own shift in conscious awareness, and that shift is going to occur one person at a time. I ask those viewing this video to try and get your minds around such an earth-shattering concept as creating a shift in consciousness, which has its starting point within each and every individual who can catch the vision and commit themselves to changing themselves. To do this, we have to take the bull by the horns and stop waiting for some kind of external change to magically manifest and alter our consciousness. We each have to take the personal responsibility to do it for ourselves on an individual basis. Once enough individuals can capture the dream, then the dream will spread as people start to focus their energies into creating a new paradigm of consciousness, while at the same time starving the old cognitive system of sustenance, which is grounded in fear, paranoia, and maintaining a sense of being powerless in the individual. You are not powerless. I am inviting you to recognize this one key fact that the controllers of our consciousness do not want you to remotely realize. They can only rule the powerless, or at least those who believe they are powerless. These books provide information and a framework for the individual to finally recognize that they are not powerless, that we can all be masters of our own cognitive destiny if we will only take the ball and run with it. I've embraced this vision of a better humanity. The question you must ask yourself is whether you can find the same desire to change the world one person at a time, or not. This message is not for everyone. It is no different than the observation in the Matrix about how most people are not ready or willing to be unplugged from the machine world. What these books advocate, and what I agree with, is that not only do we need to unplug completely from the ego system of consciousness, but that we each have a personal responsibility to create a new paradigm of consciousness outside of this system. And for those that are hopelessly lost in the ego system of consciousness, we have to have the courage to leave them behind in their world of illusion as it crumbles before their eyes. For those who are so hopelessly ensnared in that system and refuse to let go, they are part of the problem, not part of the solution. All this talk of being compassionate has to go by the wayside. There is no one on this planet who can make the choice about their own consciousness except themselves. We are all equally responsible for our own minds. You can't save anyone who refuses the life preserver when it is thrown to them. If they refuse, they drown. And that was their decision. With this chance to create and shape a new paradigm for human consciousness, we each have to realize that the life preservers have been thrown to the human race over and over again, and yet they still refuse the offer of life-saving assistance. We all have to recognize that people like this are not our problem. They are their own problem. We can no longer contribute our energies into saving those who refuse to be saved, so it's time to tow in the lifeline and move the boat ahead without them. Our compassion has been exhibited time and time again whenever we try to awaken people to the truth. We feel like we are banging our heads against the wall or shoveling shit against the tide with a teaspoon. It is now time that we grow up ourselves and quit beating ourselves up over the choices of those who refuse assistance. It's time to move on and leave them in their lost world without waiting for the stragglers to catch up. It's time that we create something new. The invitation is open for anyone who chooses to join in this enterprise. All others can stay where they are and drown in their world of illusions. This is practical spirituality. Practical spirituality means that we have to come to terms with the tyranny that surrounds us and take charge of our own individual conscious advancement. Being practical in spirit means that we can't make ourselves irrelevant by becoming so lost in escapist illusions of alien rescue or heavenly intervention that our words and ideas are turned into nonsense by the listener. We're going to continue to live in a human world with human problems. Practical spirituality means that we have to acknowledge these issues and not avoid them. If we expect to create a new world, solving these problems is going to have to be faced head-on. Practical spirituality requires us to face the issues of racism, incest, conflict, crime, strife, and tyranny in all of its ugly forms. We can't run away from these problems. So as we create this new cognitive reality, we also have to consider how we are going to confront and deal with these issues. Running away from the truth and burying your head in the sand, hoping that these issues will all magically solve themselves, is not in the least practical. And we cannot create a new paradigm of human reality so long as we continue to ignore these problems. Passing laws does nothing because laws are ignored. If we desire to change the world, we have to change ourselves. If we do not change our individual consciousness away from tyrannical thinking or the perpetual victim mentality, we would only be dragging the problems of the old paradigm into a new reality. The only way we can remove these elements of tyranny is a new reality, and it is to remove them from our own consciousness. We all have to recognize the ego tyrant that hides within our own consciousness if we ever expect to create a world without such tyranny. And we have to remove this parasite from our consciousness. So long as we refuse to admit this monster controls our thoughts, actions, and especially our emotions, we will never advance our consciousness away from its control. We can all stand around and point our fingers at the problems and say, somebody should do something. Well, I'm here to tell you, I'm somebody, and you are somebody. I am doing what is necessary to change myself. You have to ask yourself what you are doing, or what you are going to do. Are you going to do anything but slog along as nothing but another cog in this infernal ego machine? We have 7 billion somebodies on the planet. What happens when enough of us realize that we are all somebody and not just another nobody in the ego-controlled meat grinder, and decide to create a new world paradigm? How many of us does it take to reach a critical mass to where humanity can roll over into this new paradigm of consciousness? We will never know if we don't individually do our part to make this change occur. First within our own consciousness, then selectively in small groups as the idea blossoms and grows. These videos are planting seeds of awareness. Whether these seeds find fertile soil is up to you to decide. Do you want to see a better world? Do you want to see our species move beyond the paradigm of control driven by the ego desires in every human mind at this point of our evolution? If you can't find that desire and drive within yourself to help bring about this change, then the soil of this planting is not fertile. If, however, you find that this concept is one you wish to embrace, then it's incumbent upon you to spearhead your own work. This requires doing the research into how this can be done. The first step is altering how you think. We have to be large enough to recognize that our present way of thinking is the problem. In order to create a new paradigm of consciousness and create a new reality, we have to teach ourselves to think broader, to stretch our imaginations, and to lose the rigid thinking processes of the present ego paradigm. In order to find this expansiveness in our own thinking only requires that we get in touch with that consciousness within ourselves, that spirit that lies buried and smothered under piles of ego lies and false limited perceptions. Our individual consciousness is more expansive than we realize. We all know more than our present consciousness controlled by the ego parasite allows us to see. When we can whittle away all of the illusions and handicaps of the needy ego parasite, we can finally start to envision the solutions to the problems that presently seem insurmountable once we can start to tap more fully into our originating consciousness. There are 2 handicapping phrases that are going to have to go to the wayside if we ever expect to create this new paradigm for human consciousness. And they are, I can't and I won't. If you fall into the I won't category of thinkers, then you need to just move along back into your illusionary world of handicapped consciousness, because the new paradigm only has room for those who know I can and I will. Does this sound challenging? Well, if so, you have to ask yourself why a paradigm of consciousness that can make everyone a winner should be denigrated in favor of a conscious mindset which always finds defeat or blame as the first solutions to any problem. The new paradigm of consciousness is not going to be filled with victims. It is going to be filled with victors. For those who can achieve victory over the tyrant that lies in their own minds first, then know that they can create a better world without this parasite destroying our world and our consciousness. At the present moment in time, it is virtually impossible for this species to even imagine what a personally responsible human being of higher consciousness might even be like without giving them some kind of godlike powers. Even our imagination about such a being is tainted with magic and miracles, beings walking on water or turning water into wine or, heaven forbid, levitating. We can't remotely envision what conscious advancement is without adding the miraculous happenings from a simplistic material parlor trick scenario, because this is all the limited consciousness of the ego parasite can imagine. The ego parasite can see nothing beyond its own limited, twisted vision of the material world, with sugar plum doctrines of love and light, heavenly redeemers, or alien saviors. Humanity, in all its long history of being controlled by the ego, can see nothing beyond its own desire to feel special or be special in the eyes of others. This is why all doctrines of the spiritually elect sell to humans over and over again, no matter how the paradigm of wishful thinking is packaged and sold to the masses. After thousands of years of pie-in-the-sky promises by priests, gurus, saints, and benevolent aliens, none of this shit has ever once delivered on its promise. Yet the limited consciousness of the ego keeps chasing rainbow after rainbow and never finding that elusive pot of gold that these doctrines always promise, for the simple reason that what is being peddled as the best brand of spiritual truth lacks even an ounce of practical spirituality. Within every doctrine of salvation and candy store dreams of being special and therefore being entitled to escape from reality, we find a consciousness that refuses to take responsibility for itself except through providing the necessary lip service of stating, "I believe." Simple beliefs will not change the world for the better. Practical spirituality shows us that we have to take action if we want to change the world. We have to take action to change ourselves, and this takes personal responsibility. If we don't find the power to change ourselves, how do we remotely think we can change the world? In the realm of practical spirituality, protesting en masse within the present system is not going to change a goddamn thing. It just adds one more dimension of conflict that some gang of ego consciousnesses can get behind and get emotionally riled up over. All wrapped up in ego-righteous indignation and claiming they are right when all others are wrong. This will not change the world because they are only actions taking place inside the same limited box of consciousness that controls our world. In order to create something new, it has to be something new. We can't continue to rehash all the worn-out strategies perpetrated by emotionally inflamed egos who, in the long run, only want their own selfish piece of the pie. If we desire to create a new reality of consciousness, we are going to have to develop the wisdom to remove our consciousness from the ego grist mill that enslaves our originating consciousness, our spirit consciousness. We're going to have to become bigger than that. Bigger than what we are where our conscious advancement is concerned. As the book referenced in this video tell us, we have to be humans becoming human. To create this new paradigm of consciousness, we are each responsible for taking control over our own minds, wresting the control of the ego parasite out of its hands. When we can finally get past the ego's limiting perceptions, then we will finally start to become the human race instead of being the inhuman race, which thrives on greed, murder, mayhem, drug abuse, child abuse, pedophile priests, and constant wars. It is time we stop being inhumane to each other and become human. In Book 3 of the Paradigm Messages, Becoming, we find the following relevant passage. Quote, "The ability to continue on the current path is now reaching a point at which the path must divide. There are those who innately know that the time has come to make a decision. They must either continue on the path that is leading to a vibrational decline towards destruction, or stop where they are and look for a way to change directions. Herein lies the awakening process. The current choice that is offered by what has been called the esoteric or New Age alternative lacks grounding and application of its principles within daily life. It requires ignoring, investigating, and understanding the plan of the planetary controllers for fear of supporting them by recognizing their presence and actions. This head-in-the-sands approach fails to appeal to the general population, for it lacks practical application appeal. Most people are unable to separate their focus to ignore the world around them and replace it with one that they cannot perceive through their five senses. This is particularly true because the sources for participation comes from information perceived to be from beings whose teachings recommend disconnection from the apparent real world. Their teachings often are so idealistic as to leave their leaders, followers, feeling guilty and frustrated, for they are unable to attain such levels within their current living situations. In the end, the ideals are abandoned. It is this reported disconnect from the real world which abounds like a virus in New Age spirituality that proves the messages in these 3 books are not of the same type of message received by New Age channeled sources. And also why I put emphasis on reading them, no matter how much they presently challenge your perceptual reality. Within this passage, we also find a lack of practical spirituality as it is practiced and believed in the modern spiritual marketplace. And that is what it is, simply a marketplace designed to bilk the gullible out of their money with just another lure to enslave their consciousness into another paradigm of ego control and bullshit beliefs. To become a consciously advanced race of beings, we're going to have to expand our cognitive horizons beyond the end of our perceptual noses. Practical spirituality doesn't mean we all have to check into a monastery or check out of facing the problems that confront us as a species, because, we all have to pay bills and we got kids to feed and all the necessities of life to be lived. Even though the system of control and tyranny exists, we all still have to operate within the required necessities of the present system on a physical level, but not on a consciousness level. To become a consciously more aware human being, we are going to have to dedicate the time to advance ourselves. We all have the same number of hours in the day to accomplish this, so simply saying, "I don't have time," is just an excuse. If you want to make this happen for yourself, you have to make the time to make it a reality for yourself. Anything less is only avoiding your personal responsibility to be the change, rather than simply being a hanger-on or a cheerleader. As Book 3 relates in regard to this, quote, "Becoming involved through commitment to the ground crew requires focus of intent and purpose. It also carries with it the advantage of connection to a flow of energy that is purposefully aligned with the universal laws and the flow of intelligent thought that supports creative expansion of thought into matter. This connection involves a balance of responsibility and compensation in direct proportion to contribution. It does not reward foolish input that endangers the outcome." What is meant by compensation has nothing to do with money or financial reward. The rewards come with personal focus on your own conscious advancement and personal responsibility to help bring about this change in human consciousness. In other words, this process requires dedication and commitment, primarily to advancing your own consciousness. Do you have the strength to make a commitment to yourself and keep it? If you find that you do, your rewards will be found in a consciousness free of your own ego's tyrannical reign over your mind and becoming a member in one of the most powerful and unique opportunities the human race has ever encountered in all of its long and sordid history. Does this all sound like hype? Well, maybe it does, but where else can we find inspiration in this world that only peddles doctrines of spiritual and governmental dependency and always blaming someone else for what ails the world? The question is not whether you can light this fire for your own conscious advancement within yourself, but whether you can keep that fire stoked and burning as you pass through all the travails that come with deconstructing the ego's control over your own mind and freeing the spirit consciousness that is your birthright and heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I appreciate any and all that take the time to open their mind and search for the truth. Thank you so much for taking your time to listen to Awakening the Age of Revealing. There's more to come. If this message resonates with you, please send it far and wide. Share it with those you think would understand these concepts and seek to be a part of the solution. Again, this is Doug Michael. Until next time, walk in peace.